DS, India's premier platform for global dialogue on sustainability and climate action. I am Harshita Kaur, a research associate at TERI, and it is my privilege to MC today's plenary session on NDC 3.0 and multilateralism on the road to COP30 and COP33. First, a safety announcement. TERI is a health, safety, and environment certified organization. In case of an emergency, please exit the auditorium calmly using the nearest fire exit. This auditorium has 7 exits, 4 exits on the ground floor, right, left, and 2 main entrances, 1 exit on the stage, and 2 exits in the balcony, same as the balcony entrances. Fire marshals will be stationed at the aisles and exits to assist you. Kindly follow the instructions for a safe and orderly evacuation. Now it's time to introduce our esteemed dignitary with us and call them upon stage. Professor Jim Skea, Chair, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Please can I have a round of applause and welcome him on the stage. Her Excellency, Ms. Marina Silva, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Government of Brazil. Can I please have a big round of applause? You guys just had lunch. His Excellency, Mr. Aain Bahadur Shahi Thakuri, Minister of Forest and Environment, Nepal. His Excellency, Dr. Muaviyath Mohamed, Minister of State for Tourism and Environment, Maldives. Also joining us virtually is His Excellency, Mr. Andreas Bjelland Eriksen, Minister of Climate and the Environment, Government of Norway. Her Excellency, Ms. Jennifer Lee Morgan, State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the Federal Foreign Office, Germany. Can we please have a round of applause? Also here with us, I want to call upon stage Ms. Helen Clarkson, Chief Executive Officer, Climate Group. Ms. Anne Gillema, Executive Director, 350.org. Last but not the least, our chair for the day, Mr. R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, the Energy and Resources Institute. Can I please have a round of applause? Now, setting the context.
Minister for German, she's here?
No, I said she is.
You announced her.
No, I said she is joining us virtually. Yeah.
Both of them?
Yeah. As we approach COP30 in 2025, countries will submit their updated nationally determined contribution, NDC 3.0, reflecting heightened ambition based on insights from the global stocktake. COP30 in Belém, Brazil, will advance the global goal on adaptation through the UAE Belém work program, aiming to establish measurable indicators for adaptation progress. Looking ahead to COP33 in 2028, the second global stocktake will serve as a crucial checkpoint under the Paris Agreement, assessing global progress in mitigation, adaptation, and finance, while identifying key gaps in climate action. Today's plenary discussion will explore how these global processes, the second GST, NDC 3.0 revisions, and the UAE Belém work program can shape climate ambition, enhance accountability, and prioritize concrete actions for adaptation and resilience building. Before we begin, let's set the stage with an introductory video that highlights the key milestones leading up to COP30 and COP33. Can we please have the video?
As we look toward COP30 and COP33, the road ahead will be critical for shaping global climate action and ensuring accountability in our fight against climate change. In 2025, COP30 in Belém, Brazil, will mark a turning point. Countries will submit their updated nationally determined contributions, NDC 3.0, reflecting heightened ambition and alignment with the findings of the global stocktake. The UAE Belém work program will advance the global goal on adaptation, developing measurable indicators to track progress in building resilience and adaptation. The second global stocktake in 2028 will provide a comprehensive assessment of progress under the Paris Agreement, identifying gaps in mitigation, adaptation, and finance. This plenary will explore how these key processes, NDC 3.0, the GST, and the UAE Belém work program, can drive global ambition, enhance accountability, and prioritize actionable measures for adaptation. We will address critical questions. What should NDC 3.0 prioritize to bridge the gaps in emissions reduction and adaptation? How can partnerships between governments and non-state actors accelerate implementation? And what reforms are needed for multilateralism to deliver climate justice? Together, we must ensure that NDC 3.0 and multilateralism rise to the challenge of delivering climate justice, resilience, and a sustainable future. Join us as we chart a path toward COP30 and COP33, turning ambition into action and ensuring no one is left behind in the fight against climate change. The time is now. Let's work together for a resilient, equitable, and sustainable future.
Thank you. Now, to commence this session, it is my pleasure to hand over the panel to Mr. R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, the Energy and Resources Institute, to take the discussions forward, starting with his chair's remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome. Good afternoon. The afternoon is not very sleepy, so I think we can give you some provocative questions so that everybody can stay awake. Working. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. The topic given to our session is NDC, COP30 and COP33. But it is defined by one adjective, which is multilateralism. So it's interesting to frame the entire movement towards COP, the next COP, and the next COP 5 years later in the context of multilateralism, multilateral drive, multilateral consensus. Before I request my honorable panelists, 3 or 4 of them are ministers. Professor Jim Skea, you are well aware, he is the IPCC chair, and he was the force behind the working group 3 of the previous assessment. He is now heading the current assessment. Honorable Minister from Nepal, Honorable Minister from Brazil, Honorable Minister from Germany will join us virtually, Honorable Minister from Maldives, and Helen Clarkson, the CEO of the Climate Group, and of course Aain from the 360 Group. They're all veterans in their field. They bring a vast experience, not only in the policy making, but science at the global level, and also the civil society experience. So it's a rich panel that we have today, and hopefully we will learn a lot about how we can resolve our challenges in the movement towards COP30 and 5 years later at COP33. COP33 is important, so is COP30. COP30 is going to be held in Brazil, in Belém, in Amazon, and in fact we have the Honorable Minister from Brazil. Her singular credit is that she was able to bring down the deforestation in Amazon. So we are really fortunate and honored to have you, Minister, here. The next COP after that will be held in India, COP33, 2028. And each of these COPs are singularly important because COP30, we have a roadmap. We have a roadmap for a work program. GST, the second round of GST will be held in India in 2028. So what are the challenges in these two different work streams that we have? In the current year, we have a work stream called NDC. All the countries are expected to come up with or revise or update or come up with new targets, new nationally determined contributions as we call them, both on the mitigation and the adaptation side, and this is a big challenge. In fact, the deadline is already upon us, but the countries will choose their time. By the end of the year, we will also need to conclude the work program on global goal on adaptation. So it's an interesting period that we are living now. In this current year itself, we will see two major work streams to be concluded at Belem. So that's a major challenge. But the equally important challenge is the multilateralism. You know, UNFCCC is one treaty which is defined by consensus. And we would like to understand from our esteemed panelists here as to how this spirit of multilateralism, we are living in a fractious world. We are living in a world where people are, you know, sometimes wedded to environmentalism, sometimes not. We live in a very uncertain world. We live in an extremely explosive geopolitical situation. How is it that we can keep this spirit alive in the roadmap, in the road to COP30, and again later, 5 years later? So let me first invite my first speaker, Professor James Skea, to address this question. And my request to you, Professor James Skea, would be that while addressing the questions from science perspective, we would also like to learn from you, what is your assessment of the challenge? What are the options that we have before us at COP30?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate this invitation to make a few remarks at this leadership dialogue. I just want to emphasize at the start, and if we could have the slides, please. IPCC is not a negotiating body. It's a science policy interface, and we are required not to provide commentary on political matters. But although we are a science-based body, the science that we assess is certainly caught in the political crosshairs. I've just come from an IPCC plenary session in Hangzhou, China, where it took many hours to agree the outlines of the 3 working group contributions to the 7th assessment report. We actually finished at 10:35 in the evening of Saturday, the 1st of March, more than 28 hours after our scheduled endpoint, after a marathon 38-hour session without break. But we did finish, and we did agree the outlines of the working group reports for the 7th assessment cycle. Now, this session here has as one of its focuses the gaps in emissions reductions, adaptation, and finance on the path to COP30 and COP33. And these, of course, reflect the 3 goals in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement: the long-term temperature goal, the goal on adaptation and resilience, and the goal on making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate-resilient development. And let me say right from the start that these 3 goals hang together. They're mutually dependent. We're not going to achieve sustainable development or eradicate poverty unless we make progress on all 3. And we cannot make progress on any one of these goals unless we make progress on all of them. Limiting global warming is a prerequisite for equitable and sustainable development, since those who face the worst consequences of climate change are those who have contributed least to its causes. The most vulnerable are in the most urgent need of measures to improve resilience and enhance adaptive capacity. And without enhanced financial flows, we will not have the means to implement urgently needed adaptation and mitigation measures. Now, the last IPCC reports, and indeed the first global stocktake, made it quite clear that we are not on track to meet any of these goals at the moment. This graph from the 6th assessment synthesis report shows that the continuation of current policies would result in roughly constant emissions out to 2050, the pink emissions band at the top, consistent with global warming of roughly 3 degrees by the end of the century. From a 2020 start, scenarios consistent with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, the blue band at the bottom, have emissions falling by 43% by 2030, and scenarios consistent with limiting warming to 2 degrees, the green band, have emissions falling by 25%. If emissions in 2030 are at the level implied by the current nationally determined contributions, the purple band, global warming can still be limited to 2 degrees if efforts are accelerated, but 1.5 degrees will be beyond reach. And there's both an emissions gap and an implementation gap. An emissions gap because the NDCs in aggregate fall far short of what is needed to put us on a pathway consistent with the Paris Agreement. And there's an implementation gap because committed policies and measures will not allow the NDCs to be realized. After the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 was published in 2018, I was quoted as saying that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees was possible within the laws of chemistry and physics. That is still true, but that aspiration is truly hanging by a slender thread. Now, turning to impacts, with warming having exceeded 1.5 degrees last year, if only temporarily for the moment, we are entering a zone where the risks of climate change are high, indicated by the red and purple shades in this so-called burning embers diagram. Looking at the right-hand side, this is especially true for warm water corals, where reefs could disappear almost completely at 2 degrees warming. And turning to the land-based systems on the left-hand side, the risks associated with wildfires, permafrost degradation, and biodiversity rise from moderate to high as warming increases above 1.5 towards 2 degrees. And beyond 2 degrees warming, we face risks linked to declining yields for staple crops such as maize and for fisheries. Truly, every fraction of a degree's warming matters. And now I turn to the third Paris goal, financial flows that are consistent with low emissions and climate resilient development. The IPCC's sixth assessment report concluded that current finance flows for mitigation are a factor 3 to 6 lower than those compatible with the Paris long-term temperature goal. The gaps are least for energy supply, but still fall short by a factor of 2 to 5. The gaps are larger for energy efficiency, transport, and especially for agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And they're larger for developing countries than they are for developed countries. Unfortunately, comparable data was not available for adaptation, but it's clear that the gaps are even larger. Private finance for adaptation is rare, and the goal for developed countries to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 for climate action in developing countries was not achieved by that date, nor indeed by the time the IPCC's sixth assessment synthesis report was approved in 2033. Now I have thoroughly depressed you, so let me turn to the question of solutions. We identified in energy supply alone available options that could reduce global emissions substantially by 2030. The largest potential lies in wind and solar energy and other contributions from reduced fugitive emissions of methane from oil and gas systems, bioelectricity, and nuclear energy. The color coding in this slide refers to the cost of the options, and blue signifies that an option would make sense even without climate change. Most of the potential is available at a cost of less than $100 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. And again on solutions, turning to adaptation, there are clear opportunities to reduce the risks of climate change. The left-hand side of this figure shows that active adaptation measures can, for example, reduce the risks of heat-related mortality and morbidity. On the right-hand side shows that projected risks associated with the availability of and access to food depend on assumptions about patterns of socioeconomic development. Risks can be managed up to a point. Now, I would like to turn to IPCC forward plans. We are certainly not a 24/7 news organization. We work in 7-year cycles, but our plans for the 7th cycle are now almost complete. We have 2 pieces of work that are already underway. The first lead authors meeting for a special report on climate change in cities takes place next week in Osaka in Japan, and the report is due to be approved in early 2027. There is a methodology report on short-lived climate forces. That is a report that provides guidance to those compiling emission inventories for the UNFCCC. It also has a lead authors meeting this month. And I should say that short-lived climate forces refer to pollutants that do affect global warming, such as volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides. Now, last week in Hangzhou in China, as I mentioned, we agreed the outlines of the main products of the IPCC 7th cycle, the 3 working group contributions on the physical science basis, impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, and mitigation. There was a lot to discuss, and it was a tough meeting, but with the spirit of compromise and flexibility, we got through. The precise timeline for the cycle is outstanding, but we agreed to start selecting authors and preparing for a first lead authors meeting, which will take place later this year in Paris and in France. And I should say we have, for the very first time, a joint first lead authors meeting across the 3 working groups, a real first for IPCC. Now, there are 2 other important products that are planned. At the invitation of the UNFCCC, we will be producing revised and updated technical guidelines on the assessment of impacts and adaptation, with a special emphasis on metrics, indicators, and methodologies. And this will ultimately support the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement. The outline for this report has been agreed, and the guidelines will be a distinct product prepared in association with the Working Group 2 report on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. There will also be a synthesis report by late 29, bringing together the findings of the working groups and the special report. Finally, agreement on the outline of one product is outstanding: a methodology report on carbon dioxide removal technologies and carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We were very close to agreement in Hangzhou, but didn't quite get there. But I'm confident that the solution is within reach and will be achieved at our next plenary session. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. IPCC was extraordinarily busy and impactful in the 6th cycle, which ended in 2023. This cycle is also going to be busy, and there will be new reports to feed into climate negotiations later this decade. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing government perspectives.
Honor. Thank you, Professor Jimsky. Thanks for that extremely comprehensive presentation on the current scenario. And I was struck by 2 things which you said. One was that solar and wind is within our reach now. Even without any policy intervention, it can still be done. But there was another slide where you also said that investment flows need to improve. So that's the second order economic problem that we have. How do we mobilize fresh investments into areas which are now possibly within our technological reach? And to understand this, we have actually a ministerial session here. There are 4 ministers lined up here. After that, we will have another 2 important persons from the business and the civil society group. So let me now first turn to, in fact, there is a video message from Honorable Minister from Norway, Mr. Andreas Berland Eriksen. He could not join us. So there is a video message. Can it be played?
Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, this is a key year for international cooperation on climate and the environment. And in a more challenging world, we need more international cooperation, not less. I was very happy to see the agreement in Rome last week on the Convention on Biodiversity. I hope that this can signal that we want to continue moving forward together in our work to tackle the big planetary crisis that we are facing on climate, on nature, and on pollution. This year is going to be a big and important year for the Paris Agreement. We celebrate 10 years of the agreement by putting forward our next NDCs towards 2035, signaling continued and stronger ambitions on reducing our climate emissions so as to tackle the climate change that we're facing, ensuring that the climate change won't become bigger than what we can handle together as societies. At the same time, we need to work with adaptation on climate and the changes that we already see. Climate change is no longer something that's ahead of us. It's going on in the world right now, affecting millions of people, many countries. Therefore, we need to bring forward our efforts to be able to tackle the climate change that we see today, ensure that people can live safe lives in their countries. At the same time, we must mobilize more climate finance to be able to invest more in the solutions that we need to cut emissions more rapidly. I am very proud that we have exceeded our climate finance targets in Norway the last 2 years. We will continue to push forward, and I hope many others will join us in that effort to be able to ensure that we mobilize finance from all sources, both public and private, to ensure that we can do more together, cut our emissions even faster going forward. I'm also very happy that India is the country in which Norway's climate investment fund has invested the most, $260 million US. That is important to bring forward the transition that we need to see, emphasizing both cutting emissions, but at the same time job creation, value creation, ensuring that people can live their lives in a good way and in a more prosperous way in the future. Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things are a bit challenging in the world right now, but that does not mean that we do not need to work together. Climate and climate change knows no boundaries. Whether our emissions stems from Norway, India, China, or wherever they stem from in the world, they do the same harm to our common climate, to our common planet. Therefore, we need to utilize this year to work together to find solutions. I have big expectations and hopes, both for the plastics negotiations and also for COP30 in Belém. Let's show the world that we can work together. Thank you.
We'll convey our thanks to the Honourable Minister. What he said was really reassuring. He said that Norway is wedded to mobilizing more resources, and this is a calming message in these troubled times. So we will convey our thanks to him. Let me now go to Honourable Minister from Brazil, Ms. Maria Silva. And as you know, she has played a key role in the environmental protection in Brazil in her first stint. This is her second stint now. And we look forward to you for your guidance, Minister. Obviously, we would like to learn from you what are the challenges which you think COP30 is going to face, and what are your priorities there?
Senhoras e senhores, excelências, com muita satisfação que volto aqui novamente, após ontem termos tido a honra de receber uma homenagem que nos deixa todos muito comprometidos com o enfrentamento da crise ambiental que estamos vivendo do ponto de vista global.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure that I'm here once again. After yesterday's, I was honored to be granted an award, which is an award for all of us, and a very important moment that we have to show support.
Nos encontramos em momento decisivo para o futuro do planeta. Como anfitrião da COP30, o Brasil reforça que a responsabilidade climática e coletiva e que somente através de nossos esforços internos, do multilateralismo e da cooperação internacional, poderemos transformar compromissos em ações concretas.
We stand at a decisive moment for the future of our planet. As the host of COP30, Brazil underscores that climate responsibility is a collective duty, and only through multilateralism, our domestic efforts and international cooperation can we turn commitments into concrete action.
A COP30 precisa ser a COP da aceleração da implementação, garantindo que os compromissos assumidos em Dubai e Baku se traduzem em ações concretas. Precisamos avançar na transição para o fim dos combustíveis fósseis e para o fim do desmatamento ao mesmo tempo em que ampliamos o financiamento climático para 1,3 trilhão anuais, partindo dos 300 bilhões prometidos pelos países desenvolvidos. Essa promessa do caminho será crucial para o período pós-Belém.
COP30 must be the COP of accelerated implementation, ensuring that the commitments made in Dubai and Baku translate into tangible outcomes. We must advance the transition away from fossil fuels and deforestation while significantly increasing climate finance to 1.3 trillion annually, building on the 300 billion pledged by developed countries. This roadmap will be crucial for the post-Belém period.
A emergência climática também exige maior destaque para a adaptação, que dialoga diretamente com a proteção da vida e a redução de vulnerabilidades em nível local. Precisamos garantir que as comunidades mais afetadas tenham acesso a recursos e tecnologia para enfrentar os aspectos da crise climática.
The climate emergency also calls for greater emphasis on adaptation, which is directly linked to protecting lives and reducing vulnerabilities at the local level. We must ensure that the most affected communities have access to resources and technology to confront the impacts of the climate crisis.
A transição para uma economia de baixo carbono e resiliência precisa ser não apenas rápida, mas também justa. O Brasil estará garantindo alternativas econômicas sustentáveis e meios de implementação para que possamos, sobretudo, dar suporte às populações e ecossistemas mais vulneráveis.
The transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy must be not only swift, but also just. Brazil advocates for a transition model that leaves no one behind, guaranteeing sustainable economic alternatives and implementation mechanisms that support, above all, the most vulnerable populations and ecosystems.
Além disso, precisamos criar e fortalecer mecanismos inovadores para viabilizar essa transição. Um exemplo é o mecanismo Florestas Tropicais para Sempre, proposta que busca garantir fluxos financeiros perenes para a proteção da natureza e a remuneração de serviços ecossistêmicos, reconhecendo o papel essencial das florestas tropicais para a estabilidade climática global.
Furthermore, we must establish and strengthen innovative mechanisms to enable this transition. One such initiative is the Tropical Forest Forever mechanism, a proposal aimed at ensuring permanent financial flows for nature protection and the remuneration of ecosystem services, recognizing the essential role of tropical forests in maintaining global climate stability.
Para além das agendas de ação, negociação e mobilização da COP30, estamos incorporando a esta última a iniciativa de um balanço ético global, proposta pelo presidente do Brasil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, e pelo secretário-geral das Nações Unidas, Antônio Guterres.
Beyond the action, negotiation, and mobilization agendas of COP30, we are incorporating the initiative of a global ethical stocktake proposed by the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and the United Nations Secretary-General, Antônio Guterres.
O balanço ético global promoverá diálogos em diferentes regiões do mundo, incluindo pontos críticos como o Ártico, e reunirá jovens, mulheres, cientistas, líderes religiosos, artistas, empresários, povos indígenas e comunidades locais e ativistas para refletir sobre como alinhar nossas decisões ao objetivo inegociável de manter o aquecimento global em 1,5 graus Celsius de temperatura média da Terra.
The global ethical stocktake will foster dialogues across different world regions, including critical areas such as the Arctic, bringing together young people, women, scientists, religious leaders, artists, business leaders, indigenous peoples, local communities, and activists to reflect on how to align our decisions with the non-negotiable goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
O Brasil está comprometido em liderar pelo exemplo. Na COP29, em Baku, anunciamos nossa NDC com a meta de reduzir entre 59% e 67% as emissões líquidas de gases de efeito estufa até 2035, tomando como base os níveis de 2005.
Brazil is committed to leading by example. At COP29 in Baku, we announced our new NDC with the target to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 59% to 67% by 2035, based on 2005 levels.
Também conseguimos resultados expressivos na Amazônia. Reduzimos o desmatamento em 46% em relação a 2022, alcançando o menor nível dos últimos 9 anos. O presidente Lula assumiu o compromisso de zerar o desmatamento no Brasil até 2030.
We have also achieved significant results in the Amazon. Deforestation has been reduced by 46% compared to 2022, reaching its lowest level in the past 9 years. President Lula has pledged to eliminate deforestation in Brazil by 2030.
Porém, sabemos que só teremos sucesso se agirmos coletivamente. A COP30 será crucial para ajudar a refletir, a redefinir o futuro do planeta e construir um marco referencial sólido à altura do desafio climático de 10 anos após o Acordo de Paris. Muito obrigada.
However, we recognize that success can only be achieved through collective action. COP30 will be crucial in helping to redefine the planet's future and establishing a robust framework that rises to the scale of the climate change 10 years after the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. That was really inspiring. And the one central message which emerges from her intervention is global ethical stocktake. You know, something in addition to the stocktake which all the parties do. And this is obviously, the ethics needs to be the anchor of the multilateralism. We need to respect each other. We need to respect each other's interests, and it will be really the central challenge before the presidency in the years to come, to keep this momentum based on this multilateral and ethical consensus. Let me now go to the two ministers in our neighborhood, and the first will be Honorable Minister from Nepal, Mr. Aain Bahadur Shahi Thakuri. He has had a long, he's a seasoned politician, long years of politics, 40 years, I think, over 40 years. So, sir, we look forward to your guidance about the matters which, the issues which matter to people in our neighborhood. And we are all impacted by climate change, more particularly the South Asian region, which is one of the most heavily impacted regions of the climate change. So, we look forward to your message.
महामहिमहरू, प्रतिष्ठित प्रतिनिधि, महिला तथा सज्जनवृन्द, सर्वप्रथम विश्व जलवायु सम्मेलन COP30 र त्यसभन्दा अगाडि नेपालले जलवायु परिवर्तन प्रकोप जोखिम न्यूनीकरणका लागि गरेको प्रतिबद्धता अनुसारका कार्यहरू र आगामी दिनमा जलवायु सङ्कट न्यूनीकरणका लागि हाम्रो अपेक्षाहरूबारे केही विचारहरू राख्ने अवसर दिनुभएकोमा आयोजक टेरीलाई हार्दिक धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। नेपाल जस्ता जलवायुको हिसाबले अत्यन्तै संवेदनशील पर्वतीय देश र अल्प विकसित देशहरूलाई जलवायु सङ्कट न्यूनीकरणका लागि गरिने लगानीको आवश्यकता र अहिलेको वित्तीय अन्तरबारे म यस सम्मेलनमा ध्यान आकर्षित गर्न चाहन्छु। नेपाल जलवायु जोखिमका हिसाबले प्रभावित देशहरूको आवाजको समेत प्रतिनिधित्व गर्दछ। नेपाल प्राकृतिक, जैविक तथा सांस्कृतिक विविधता, जलस्रोत र हिमालयन श्रृङ्खलाका मनमोहक परिदृश्यको पनि धनी देश हो। तर जलवायु परिवर्तनका कारण हाम्रो पारिस्थितिकी प्रणाली, अर्थव्यवस्था र सामाजिक प्रणालीहरूले हिसाबले गम्भीर सङ्कटको सामना गरिरहेको छ। हाम्रा हिमाली भेगबाट उत्पत्ति हुने हिम नदीहरू द्रुत गतिमा पग्लिरहेका छन्, जसले दक्षिण एसियाको पानी र ऊर्जाको सुरक्षालाई खतरा पार्दै गएको छ। सन् 2011 देखि 24 सम्म जलवायुजन्य विपदका कारण अनुमानित नेपालले 1 अरब अमेरिकी डलर 1 अरब अमेरिकी डलर बराबरको प्रत्यक्ष आर्थिक नोक्सानी बेहोरेको छ। जैविक विविधता र प्रदूषणको सङ्कटसँगै जलवायु सङ्कटले हाम्रा जनताको जीविकोपार्जनमा दिएको विकास लक्ष्य र हाम्रा भावी पुस्ताको अस्तित्वलाई नै समाप्त पारेको छ। सन् 2050 सम्ममा जलवायु परिवर्तनका कारण नेपालको कुल ग्राह्य उत्पादन 2.2% को क्षति हुन सक्ने कुरा ADB को अध्ययनले जनाएको छ।
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First, I want to thank TERI for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts on Nepal's commitment in climate change and disaster risk reduction goals, together with our expectation from COP30 and beyond in this forum. Allow me also to share the growing need for climate investment and current gap in climate finance availability to vulnerable mountain countries like Nepal that are highly sensitive to climate change risk. Nepal's position also aligns with the voice of climate vulnerable developing countries. Nepal is blessed with enchanting landscapes, rich biodiversity, and freshwater resources. But we are facing a serious threat to our ecology, economy, and social well-being due to climate change. Our Himalayan glaciers are rapidly melting, threatening the water and energy security of South Asia. During 2021 and 24 period, Nepal suffered a direct economic loss of around $1 billion due to climate disaster. Climate crisis, together with biodiversity and pollution crisis, threaten our people's livelihood, sustainable development goals, and the very survival of our future generation. ADB estimates that due to climate change, Nepal may suffer a 2.2% annual reduction in its GDP by the year 2050.
महामहिमहरू, यस सन्दर्भमा यस सत्रका विषयवस्तुहरू नेपालका लागि अत्यन्तै महत्त्वपूर्ण छन्। हामी हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय निर्धारित योगदान NDC3 बनाउने अन्तिम तयारीमा जुटेका छौँ। सन् 2045 सालसम्म कार्बन लगायत अन्य हरित गृह ग्यासको उत्सर्जनलाई शून्यमा झार्ने गरी हाम्रा लक्ष्यहरू निर्धारण गरेका छौँ। विश्व तापमान वृद्धि 1.5 डिग्रीमा कायम हुन सकोस् भन्ने कुरामा हामी प्रतिबद्ध छौँ। COP30 को विषयवस्तु जलवायु अनुकूलन अर्थव्यवस्थामा रूपान्तरण ल्याउनु महत्त्वपूर्ण छ। त्यसैले COP30 देखि 33 सम्मको बीचको सम्बन्ध र कार्यान्वयनको यात्रा स्पष्ट होस् भन्ने हामी चाहन्छौँ। हामी विश्वको सबैभन्दा घना जङ्गल एमाजोन रेन फरेस्टलाई हाम्रो हिम श्रृङ्खलासँग जोड्न चाहन्छौँ। यी दुई सम्बन्धले हरित र नीलो अर्थतन्त्रलाई जोड्न पनि मद्दत गर्ने विश्वास हामीले लिएका छौँ। नेपालले राष्ट्रिय निर्धारित योगदान NDC3 मा प्रकृतिमा आधारित जलवायु अनुकूलन र हरित आर्थिक विकासका आयामलाई प्राथमिकतामा राखी अगाडि बढाउने योजना बनाएको छ। हाम्रो अपार जैविक विविधता, जलस्रोत र पर्यटन, विविध कृषि पारिस्थितिकी प्रणालीलाई खाद्य, पानी, ऊर्जा र स्वास्थ्य सुधारका लागि उपयोग गर्नेछौँ। विश्वव्यापी उत्सर्जनमा हाम्रो योगदान नगर्ने भएकोले हाम्रो विशेष गरी कम विकसित र जलवायु न्यायका लागि हाम्रो आफ्नो आवाज विश्व मञ्चमा राख्न चाहन्छौँ।
Excellencies, in this context, the theme of this session, NDC3 and multilateralism on the road to COP30 and COP33, is highly important to Nepal. Increasing climate risks threaten Nepal's biodiversity, water resources, and agriculture, impacting food, water, energy, and health security. Nepal, therefore, calls for a clear roadmap between COP30 and COP33. We desire to connect the Amazon forest with Himalayan mountain by linking green to blue economic goals. These regions can strengthen the theme of COP30, the transition to a climate-friendly economy. Nepal is preparing its NDC3 plan, giving priority to nature-based adaptation and green economic solutions. We are using our rich biodiversity, huge water and tourism resources, and diverse agroecological systems to address our food, water, energy, and health challenges. Nepal's contribution to global GHG emission being negligible, we therefore ask for fairness to major emitters to take on greater responsibility in providing accessible, equitable, and simplified access to climate finance to LDC and vulnerable mountain countries and reduce their own emissions.
हामीलाई कृषि, जलस्रोत व्यवस्थापन र विपद जोखिम न्यूनीकरण र जलवायु उत्थानशीलता बढाउनको लागि प्रविधि, वित्तीय र प्राविधिक सहयोगको आवश्यकता छ।
Nepal argues that developed nations should fulfill their 300 billion annual commitment by 2035, making climate finance instrument more simplified and accessible. Our finance gap is particularly large in implementing our national adaptation plan. The LDCs need means of implementation, particularly in agriculture, water management, and disaster risk reduction. Nepal also feels that current and future international carbon market mechanism should prioritize climate justice. We advocate for provisions that require developed countries, entities that engage in carbon credit for trading activities, meeting transparent emission reduction targets at home as well as in the host countries. Nepal supports nature-based solutions with local benefits and advocate for equity, justice by promoting good practices. We support stronger engagement with civil society and indigenous groups in this COP process.
महामहिम तथा सज्जनवृन्दहरू, भारत सरकारले जलस्रोत, जङ्गलको संरक्षण, जलवायु कार्य फोहोर व्यवस्थापन, नवीकरणीय ऊर्जा र कृषिको दिगो बनाएको क्षेत्रमा उल्लेखनीय उपलब्धि हासिल गरेको छ। यसले नेपालको लागि पनि महत्त्वपूर्ण सिकाइहरू भएका छ। हामीले यस प्रकारका नीतिगत, संरचनागत, समुदायको सहभागिता र दिगोपनको अभ्यासका अनुसरण गर्न चाहन्छौँ। नेपालले जलवायु परिवर्तन तथा समानुपातिक वातावरणको दिगो विकासका सन्दर्भमा सामना गरिरहेको समस्यालाई समाधान गर्न भारतको अनुभव ग्रहण योग्य छ। वर्तमान र भविष्यको अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय कार्बन बजार संयन्त्रले जलवायु न्यायलाई प्राथमिकतामा दिनुपर्छ भन्ने हाम्रो धारणा छ। हामी कार्बन क्रेडिट र व्यापारिक गतिविधिहरूमा संलग्न विकसित देश तथा संस्थाहरूले उत्सर्जन घटाउने लक्ष्यहरू पूरा गर्न आवश्यक छ भन्ने ठान्दछौँ। नेपालले समानता र न्यायका लागि प्रकृतिमा आधारित जलवायु अनुकूलनका उपायहरू खोज्न र असल अभ्यासहरूलाई बढावा दिन अपिल समेत गर्दछ। हामीले कोप प्रक्रियामा नागरिक समाज, महिला र आदिवासी समूहहरूको सम्झौतालाई समर्थन गर्दै आएका छौँ। जलवायु वित्तको परिचालन र जलवायु न्यायको विषय वैज्ञानिक प्रमाणहरूका आधारमा हुनुपर्छ। जलवायु परिवर्तनले समुदायमा परेको असरलाई NDC3 को मुख्य आधार बनाएको छ। हाम्रो जनजीवन, जीविकोपार्जन, वनस्पति र पर्वतीय क्षेत्रमा परेको जलवायु परिवर्तनका असरहरूलाई जलवायु न्यायका आधारमा बुझिदिन अपिल गर्दछौँ। हिमालयमा परेको जलवायु असरबारे विश्व समुदायको ध्यान आकर्षित गर्न नेपालले यही मे 16 देखि 18, 2025 मा जलवायु परिवर्तन, पर्वत र मानवताको भविष्य भन्ने विषयमा पहिलो सगरमाथा संवाद काठमाडौँमा आयोजना गर्दैछ। यस सम्मेलनमा यहाँहरूलाई हार्दिक आमन्त्रण गर्न चाहन्छु। अन्त्यमा COP30 देखि 33 सम्मको निर्णयले वित्तीय प्रणाली, प्राविधिक र क्षमता निर्माण, समानता र न्यायको मुद्दालाई अगाडि बढाउनेछ भन्ने विश्वास समेत लिएको छु। COP33 को छलफलले सबैको सम्मान गर्दै समानता, उत्थानशीलता र साझा जिम्मेवारीमा आधारित विश्व समुदायको निर्माण गर्न सफल हुनेछ भन्ने मैले विश्वास लिएको छु। धन्यवाद।
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, India has made significant progress in renewable energy, afforestation, climate action, waste management, and sustainable agriculture. It provides valuable lessons for Nepal. Nepal can adopt a similar approach, emphasizing the importance of policy framework, community development, and sustainable practices. India's experience can guide Nepal in balancing development, environmental sustainability, and in ensuring a resilient future for its citizens in the face of climate change. The discourse on climate justice in developing climate finance should be based on latest and best scientific evidences. Nepal feels that the specific impacts of climate change on vulnerable countries should be the basis for adaptation support. We argue that the issue of disproportionate impacts on our people and ecosystem is a matter of global ethics and shared humanity. To highlight the disproportionate climate impacts on Nepal and other Himalayan countries, Nepal is organizing an international climate dialogue called the First Sagarmatha Samvad from May 16 to 18, 2025 in Kathmandu. I cordially invite you to this event. Finally, we hope that the decisions reached during COP30 to 33 deliberation to provide means of implementation to vulnerable countries will be based on equity and justice. We hope that the COP30 discourse will address the prevailing inequities, uphold the dignity of all people, and ensure that no one is left behind. We call upon the global community to integrate climate justice into climate strategy, policy, and action plan. By doing so, we will not only address climate crisis, but also build a future rooted in fairness, resilience, and shared responsibility. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your invitation to the first Sagarmatha dialogue, first Everest dialogue, which they plan to hold in May. We look forward to that dialogue with great amount of eagerness. And I have noted one particular statement that the Honorable Minister made was that the disproportionate impacts on adaptation of the climate change should be the basis for adaptation support. Well, this is a principle which I think we will all need to remember when we move towards Belem and we finalize the work program, the UAE Belem work program. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Let me now invite the Honorable Minister from Maldives, Dr. Muaviyath Mohamed. He is the Minister of State, Ministry of Tourism and Environment. Earlier, this ministry was used to include climate change as well. But it's not hidden, it's actually a part of a larger compass. So over to you, Minister, for your message.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. Rashmi clearly said recently there was amalgamation of two ministries. Before it was Ministry of Climate Change, Environment and Energy, and now it has been combined with Ministry of Tourism, and now it's called Ministry of Tourism and Environment. But still, climate change, environment, waste management, meteorology, everything encompasses into this ministry. And honored to be with such a great guest here. For us, I'm happy to announce that last month, February 2025, we have published and submitted our NDC 3, so we are in line with our targets there. And we have a panel and from relatively huge countries compared to us. Maldives, I'm sure most of you would know where it is one of the low-lying countries in the world. No place is higher than a meter from average sea level. So we are one of the very vulnerable countries due to climate change. And I think today's topic here for this session is multilateralism. So that is a very important part for us, being a small country. Whatever we want to achieve, we have to work together with the rest of the world. So for that, I think this is a very good platform that I've got to announce our concerns. So we are having, past few years, we are having regularly COP summits. But the upcoming COP30, the question is, what should be the key priorities in NDC 3 to address gaps in emissions reduction, adaptation, and finance ahead of the second GST and COP33 just down the line. So just to address this, I have to say it is vital to ensure that strategies and actions related to both adaptation and emission reductions can be tracked and monitored. While this is straightforward for mitigation activities, adaptation strategies also require suitable indicators that align with national circumstances to measure our progress. This will aid in future planning, evaluation, and the viability of adaptation activities, and feed into global stocktake, more commonly nowadays called GST, these forums. And there is also a significant need to scale up our mitigation ambitions. If we want to keep the target at 1.5 degrees Celsius, this requires a whole of economy approach that engages all sectors and a broad range of stakeholders to develop realistic yet ambitious mitigation targets, additionally ensuring a just transition that is essential to protect vulnerable communities and promote equitable growth. And another important area is loss and damage. This must be integrated into NDC 3 or 3.0 to reflect its unique role under Article 8 of the Paris Agreement, which recognizes it as distinct from adaptation. Incorporating loss and damage in NDC is critical to ensure that it is systematically tracked and reported in the GST, providing clearer picture of growing climate-induced burdens faced by vulnerable countries like ours, the Maldives. And it is equally important to strengthen domestic financial frameworks to ensure efficient allocation of resources for climate action. This requires developing a comprehensive climate finance plan and a roadmap outlining the country's climate and development priorities, along with necessary finance for adaptation and mitigation investments. By creating sustainable, financially bankable proposals, we can attract a diverse range of funding from various authorities. And as we are going ahead towards NDC 3 and COP30. The other question that comes to our mind would be, how can partnerships between governments and non-state actors accelerate the implementation of NDC 3? So just to address that, important factors such as effective partnership between governments and non-state actors help bridge funding and technology gaps, foster innovation, and promote inclusive, transformative climate actions essential for the accelerating the implementation of NDC 3. And when it comes to some of the examples, from Maldives, we have been having very successful mechanisms like independent power producers and long-term power purchase agreements that we have been at the moment implementing and successfully experiencing through various international financial agencies like the ADB and World Bank, just to name one of the main two banks that have been involved in our renewable energy projects. And extensive stakeholder engagement with local communities, civil society organizations, the private sector, and institutions ensure that diverse perspectives are integrated into development of NDC. So by fostering a conducive policy and regulatory environment and actively engaging all stakeholders, we can build strong commitment to emission reduction and drive community-led initiatives such as coastal protection, reef restoration, and protect areas which are sensitive to the climate change. But as the previous first presentation by one of our panelists, our coral restoration and the life and the well-being of the coral reefs are at danger now. I think as mentioned, we are not going to stick with 1.5 or 2 degrees. It's going to be over 3. So I don't know what future we have as we heavily dependent on our coral reefs for our livelihood and the main industry, tourism. And again, I want to just focus the reforms that are needed to make multilateralism for climate justice for vulnerable countries and communities like us, the important role of that. Reforming, first of all, to say reform, we need reform. Reforming the governance and the structure of global institutions is essential to ensure equitable and inclusive representation, giving developing countries a stronger voice in decision making, and addressing historical imbalances. Building on this, policies and mandates must be adjusted to align with the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, climate justice, and sustainable development. Climate finance flows must be streamlined to address the challenges faced by developing countries. Many lack adequate resources, capacity, and technical expertise to engage and navigate the existing complex procedures needed to secure funding for climate mitigation and adaptation activities. And enhance technology transfer and capacity building initiatives to empower countries to more effectively implement climate adaptation and mitigation activities. This includes creating mechanisms for the transfer of innovative technologies and technical expertise, providing tailored assistance, and strengthening local institutions and human capacity. what is required is up to date and cutting edge technology for our countries, like, developing countries, that we have to depend heavily on technology from developed world. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The two key takeaways which I think we can get from his intervention is that one is the participation in the decision-making process. We need an equitable process of decision-making, and all countries need to have an equal voice there. That's the one possible way of ensuring that the conclusions are right and just and good for everyone. And second is he emphasized the threat to not only to the ecosystem but also to the economic sectors, particularly tourism in his country. So this is the climate change is a threat not just to the survival of the planet in purely the natural system, but also to the economic system, and we need to design policies and take decisions accordingly. Thank you, Minister. We have 3 speakers now and we have 15 minutes left. But I think we will be able to live within the time budget with a slight overshoot in the technical terms. We have the next speaker is Ms. Jennifer Morgan, the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action, the German Federal Foreign Office. We have her virtually. She is not present here. So, Ms. Morgan, welcome. And you represent a country which has been extremely, the outstanding country in the world of environmentalism. You are one country which has actually led the entire movement from the top. And there are political shifts now taking place all over the world, including your own country. So how do you see this affecting maybe the ambition in Europe or the ambition globally? And how do we resolve this in our road to Belém?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Mr. Rashmi, for including me. I wish I was there with you in person, but excellencies and colleagues, it's been great to listen in to ministers and hear all of your thoughts, and I'm glad to be here virtually. And indeed, I think I wanted to start out with, in the recognition of the turbulent times that we are in, to just let you all know that I wanted to start with stability. Thank you for your kind words about Germany. I think Germany and the European Union are implementing the Paris Agreement and accelerating our own green transition. And that's because we stand by our commitment to become the world's first climate neutral economy. It's also because we recognize our responsibility, having listened to what's happening in other countries that are so vulnerable around the world. But it's also because it makes good economic sense. And I think that's why the stability, and the continuation is something that you can expect. Germany, we're working towards our greenhouse gas neutrality goal, binding law by 2045. Renewables have produced over 60% of our electricity here in 2024. And that's allowed us to shut down 16 coal-fired power plants in 2024. It's also brought tremendous benefits to villages and towns and schools around the country. We're also in Europe working on the Clean Industrial Deal, you might have heard, that's laying the foundation for the strong 2040 climate plan, and the EU NBC, which we're actively working on. And that really entails investing in the energy transition, in green lead markets, by staying the course. In predictability, and as we know, long, loud legal signals is what the business community needs. That's what Europe has put forward and is continuing now to fill out, I would say, in more detail. But it's not something we can do in isolation, which is why I was so keen to be with you today. The Clean Industrial Deal enshrines the central importance of international cooperation, and that's why we'll prioritize win-win partnerships internationally. For example, developing trade on critical raw materials. And we're also working on initiatives in Germany like the NDC partnership, and through a strong network of partnerships to enable partner countries to seize the benefits for people, for health, for jobs, for development, and for everyone's own green development pathways. I think, I know we're short on time, I won't go too much into the benefits, but I think we all understand what it means when one makes these just transitions and moves towards a greener pathway, what it means for healthier urban centers, how it can bring greater energy security and less reliance on volatile fossil fuel markets, and new industrial opportunities, renewables, batteries, green hydrogen, green steel. We know from the International Energy Agency that these low-carbon technologies could create a market worth $80 billion in India alone by 2030. And we know that over the next 10 years, clean tech is set to be a $2 trillion global market, equivalent of 8% of world trade today. So that's also a driver for us all to continue on this pathway. And I think the direction of travel is clear. We see 85% of new power plants are renewables, and we also see how important NDCs 3.0 and the NAPs are right now to kind of chart that just transition and resilience building that is so needed and can minimize the cost of not acting fast enough. So it is a very big task. We need an all-of-society approach with subnational actors, the financial sector and banks, businesses, scientists, experts, NGOs. And I think we're getting much clearer information also from our economists that well-designed policies for emission reductions can deliver stronger economic growth than business as usual pathways. And we just need to look at China, where 10% of GDP growth last year came from clean tech. There's also a lot that's happening between Germany and India and Europe and India on the bilateral level, which we very much value. I wanted to just focus 3 points on the multilateral side of things. I think we are very much welcome the leadership of India in showing an interest in COP33 hosting. I think that will be a key moment also on the conclusion of the second global stocktake to keep that Paris ambition cycle moving. And we in Germany certainly stand ready to work with India on the road to COP30 with Brazil, with Minister Silva there, of course, and COP33, and intensify our exchange. We're indeed hosting here, co-hosting with Brazil in just 3 weeks' time, the Petersburg Climate Dialogue to help prepare COP30, because we know it will be a key moment. 3 points to COP30, and then I'll close. First is, I think, Paris success will be measured on how we accelerate emission reduction for all of our security and stability. We know the numbers from the IPCC in coming as close as possible to halving emissions in the next 5 years. We know that means not only expanding green technologies, but reducing the use of fossil fuels and stopping deforestation. But it also means, obviously, we need to work together to make both the 300 billion and the 1.3 trillion a reality as soon as possible, and become more sophisticated in how we deploy the right financial instruments to the right problem. And national climate plans, well, we need to be submitting those by September, and how the global community then moves forward together to close the expected gaps, particularly in emission reductions, must be the focus of COP30. Point 2 is about empowering the most vulnerable and getting serious about the cost of inaction. Both at COPs and in our national economic planning, we can no longer avoid the costs of inaction. They are just massive. And India showed great leadership during your G20 presidency, producing a flagship report on the macroeconomic risks stemming from climate change and the transition. This is the work that needs to be built on to make the rising cost of inaction part of every government and financial decision. We have to mainstream it throughout. But beyond that, we can't forget really the human, sometimes inhumane, I would say, realities of the climate impacts from today, the lives, the livelihoods lost, and we need to use this road from COP30 to COP33 to open new pathways and greater safety for the poorest and most vulnerable. And this starts with strengthening global governance on adaptation at COP30 and implementing our GST commitment on universal early warning systems and coverage by 2027. But we need to go beyond that. How can we make actually adaptation and resilience the default through our national plans, but also through the UN system and the portfolios of multilateral and regional development banks. One thing is clear, business as usual cannot continue. And my last point really is something that I want to reiterate, a recent call by the High Ambition Coalition, which is that the Paris Agreement process must be informed by the best and the latest available science. GST and COP33 are designed to be the key decision points in the Paris process to better inform policies. And only by equipping policymakers with the most recent evidence and insights can we chart the most equitable and just path towards a safer world for all people. So I see many opportunities for cooperation. Thank you for giving me a chance to share some thoughts, and I wish you a very successful following conversations.
Thank you, Secretary Morgan, for your thoughts. I noticed that she emphasized just transition in a number of words, a number of times. This is something which has fallen by the wayside. In the last 2 or 3 COPs, I have not heard of this word being repeated many times. Although this used to be a very major issue and it continues to be a major issue, I hope in the process and in the progress towards Belém and beyond, we accept this challenge. She did mention 3 things. Of course, they continue to be a part of our discourse for a number of years, and I hope the momentum that we build up takes care of all these 3 issues that she has mentioned. Thanks once again to her. We have now 2 speakers who bring their experience from the world outside the negotiating world, the world outside the governments. I know we have Helen Clarkson, who is the CEO of the Climate Group, and this group has been responsible for several coalitions. A number of, for example, RE100, EV100, Concrete Zero, Steel Zero, a number of these initiatives she has piloted, and we would love to hear from her as to how she looks at the challenge and what are the solutions possible. Of course, the clock is ticking.
Excellencies, and TERI, thank you so much for having me. I'm normally told to speak slower. I'm now being told to speed up, so we'll see how that goes. I'm CEO of Climate Group. We're a non-profit. We work across the world with some of the world's largest businesses and most influential regional governments with a mission to drive climate action fast. And I've been joking, and normally when you turn up to these things, you go up to people you know and sort of say, oh, how's it going? And this time everyone's going, what's happening? How is it going? What are you doing? What do you think? And I think more than ever, we sort of don't know. There's a time of real uncertainty. And so some of these comments have to be taken in that context. On the one hand, the science is really clear, as we've heard. We can see the impacts outside. On the other hand, this incredibly uncertain geopolitical context in which climate is increasingly weaponized. But less visible is the level of collaboration and coordination between a wide range of stakeholders, particularly subnational governments and businesses, and that should give us hope. The current NDC cycle is an opportunity to supercharge their efforts, but they need to be more meaningfully involved in setting the NDC targets. At Climate Group, we work with 2 key stakeholder groups through our Under 2 coalition and our corporate commitment campaigns. State and regional governments are often overlooked in the climate conversation, but they are the level of government that are often most directly responsible for climate implementation. In a federal country like India, and indeed like the US, it is states, cities, and municipalities that are on the front lines of climate impact and the first responders when disasters strike. During President Trump's last presidency, California showed how it could continue to implement bold climate action. For example, continuing to push fuel emission standards, even with opposition from central government. Its cap and trade program has generated significant funds for climate investments while putting a price on carbon emissions. And the positive examples are not just limited to developed economies. Querétaro in Mexico has a tax on emitters, the proceeds of which support biodiversity preservation. And that's just one example of how states and regions are addressing emissions reductions. In Brazil, the state of Minas Gerais is using its purchasing power to support carbon reduction and reshape markets. And through a new food procurement strategy, they're aiming to change food supply practices. So this level of government is critical for climate success, and that's why at COP28 in Dubai, we worked with the COP28 presidency, with Bloomberg and others to launch CHAMP, the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships, which is a commitment from national governments to cooperate with subnational governments in the financing, implementation and monitoring of climate strategies. And signatories include Colombia, Kenya, South Korea and the UK. As I've mentioned, Climate Group also works with businesses through our corporate commitment campaigns. We've heard RE100, EV100, Still Zero. Companies make ambitious climate commitments, and yet then we use the power of those networks to drive policy changes in key economies. For example, RE100 companies told us that South Korea and Japan are two of the hardest, most challenging countries for them to procure renewable electricity. And so we use that information and their knowledge to identify specific policy barriers and then work with governments to remove those. South Korea is a really good example of this. There are very specific regulations there saying where you can site solar. So in over half the districts, you can't put solar within 100 meters to a kilometer of residential dwellings. Well, the way that we've rolled out solar in the rest of the world is put it on residential dwellings. So that's the sort of regulation, if we change it, will unlock that business investment that's ready to go. So for the NDCs to drive ambition, we need detailed sector-specific transition plans with interim targets. They need to be complemented by model investment frameworks, and it's essential to send a clear signal on ambition to business and provide that foundation through which to boost private sector investment, which is going to be critical if we're going to climb that ladder from the 3 billion committed at COP29 to the 1.3 trillion we know is needed. And it's not just enough, we started to hear this in the last couple of speeches, that those plans focus on mitigation. Governments and businesses also need clarity on adaptation priorities with a clear focus on vulnerable sectors affected and what needs to be done to build resilience. In South Africa, the Presidential Climate Commission is consulting with local government, business, faith groups and youth on what should be in their NDC, and time again, different stakeholders are raising the importance of ensuring that adaptation needs are captured. Many businesses understand that their future survival as business means facing climate risk along their supply chains, in their operations, in their customer bases, which is why they are remaining committed on climate. But they need support and they need certainty of future direction. And that's where the NDCs can help set out the path along which they can operate. And the more that we can ground that in the near future, the better. So the COP30 Brazilian presidency is very, very clear. We are in the era of implementation. The businesses and subnational governments that we work with are ready to provide that implementation support, and the NDC 3.0 cycle is an important opportunity to supercharge those efforts. National governments at the moment are falling short of meeting the moment, but there are other actors that are keeping the momentum and can support them, and we need to engage and empower those stakeholders to advance the implementation of NDCs 3.0. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clarkson, for your thoughts expressed so beautifully and economically. And then what I have noted is that you spoke on behalf of the business, that the businesses are willing to work, provided the governments give them certain degree of certainty in the policies. So that's a point that is absolutely well noted. The last speaker, but last but not the least, Ms. Aain, she is the Executive Director of 360 org. And she is Executive Director here, but you know, this 360 org is known for people-led action, people-led climate solutions. So we will, we are eager to know what exactly do you suggest in terms of people-led solutions for COP30 or beyond.
Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm really honored to be here with such an illustrious group of people. Thanks very much to TERI for inviting me. As our chair alluded to, 350 is building a global movement to end fossil fuels and power up renewable energy. Our motto is that to change everything, we need everyone. Now, 10 years after the Paris Agreement, to borrow a line from an Indian negotiator from years past, Paris Agreement is not dead, but it is certainly in critical condition. We've heard today governments are not stepping up with the ambitious NDCs to bring fossil fuels to a speedy end. Rich countries that are historically responsible for the bulk of emissions are not putting anything like the necessary money on the table, and fossil fuel companies are dumping their Paris commitments in order to actually expand production. So we are about to crash right through that 1.5-degree safety barrier, and we are zooming straight towards the 3-degree precipice. So why is this happening when the science is clear, the economics are compelling, the technology is available and affordable? At the end of the day, it is about political will. So where are we going to find political will in this fractured world? Not from politicians, from the people. But of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? So if you don't believe me, listen to Exxon, which actually increased its internal price for carbon in the wake of the first People's March for Climate that we organized, because the march increased the likelihood that government would have to act to limit emissions. To see that many people marching is clearly going to put pressure on government to do something, Exxon said with some vexation. But now fast forward to last year, when what happened? Opposition parties in many countries seized on the energy transition as something cooked up by the elite to hurt the masses. In quite a few countries, they actually won elections with pledges to roll back climate action. Meanwhile, Exxon and other companies feel confident enough about the current political inertia to start ramping up fossil production again. Now, from some of the presentations I've heard here from countries like Guyana and India on their just transition initiatives, it sounds like they are doing a great job of trying to bring people along on the road to deep decarbonization. But globally, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. We are not taking people with us. So we heard today about the emissions gap, the implementation gap, the financing gap. Most important of all, we have a people gap. So what has gone wrong, and how do we build the popular support that we need for transformative change? First of all, I strongly echo the call from His Excellency Minister Bhupender Yadav last night and our speakers today that we must put equity, gender justice, and poverty reduction at the heart of NDCs. Not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's the only way to build a lasting popular constituency for climate action. The fossil energy system is ridden with inequalities, both within and across countries. And that starts with trapping many developing countries in low-value commodity extraction, and it stretches all the way to widespread energy poverty. We need to seize the energy transition as an opportunity to put that right. But too often, climate policies actually do exactly the opposite by putting a disproportionate share of the costs of the transition on low-income households. A great counterexample, a positive example of how this can be done right, is India's gradual phase-out of fossil fuel subsidies that disproportionately benefited wealthier households. Those subsidies were phased out, and a levy on fossil fuels was introduced. The proceeds of that levy went into a fund that subsidized renewable energy with a particular focus on low-income households and informal workers. So just to give one example, hugely popular EV program subsidized 2- and 3-wheel vehicles at a much higher rate than 4-wheel cars. And those 2- and 3-wheel vehicles are crucial to the livelihoods of poorer people in India. At global level, 350 is campaigning in support of the call from Brazil to introduce a minimum tax on wealth to generate new funds for climate action and also to reduce economic inequality. A tax, a 2% tax on just 3,000 of the wealthiest people in the world would raise almost double the 300 billion that was pledged in Baku. My second point is about getting behind locally led solutions that do practical things to improve people's lives. At 350, we realized a couple of years ago that the climate movement was falling into the trap of being people who just say no. No, you can't have that. No, you can't do that. And that makes it all too easy to be painted as enemies of progress, as enemies of prosperity, as neo-colonial bullies who don't want others to have a good life. And indeed, last year's elections, and the one just recently in Germany, demonstrated how powerful a narrative that is. So we have pivoted from just campaigning against fossil fuels to organizing communities for equitable renewable energy solutions that improve their health and livelihoods while reducing their outgoings. Our network has now grown to over 500 local groups around the world, most in the global south. What draws them in is the potential for decentralized renewable energy to improve their lives, their families, their communities, but it doesn't stop there because we also link them up nationally and globally. So when it comes to pushing government to adopt more ambitious climate targets, you will also find our local groups at the forefront. And finally, as others have said, if we want the people behind us, we also need them beside us. And that means giving them, and particularly marginalized groups who are most directly affected by climate change, giving them a real seat at the table and a real say in the funding. So if we really believe in locally led climate solutions and a just transition, why don't we set aside, say, 10% of climate finance for initiatives proposed by communities, as Kenya has done? And at the global level, the multilateral system also needs to be reformed to allow more meaningful participation of marginalized people and their organizations. We are uniting indigenous organizations in the 9 countries of the Amazon with indigenous movements in other parts of the world. And as the guardians of the planet, they are calling for official recognition at the next COP. And I want to leave you with a call to action. At this very critical moment when we desperately need transformative change, but we seem to lack the means or the will to make it happen, collective action by people is how we recreate that ability to act at scale, to do great and courageous things together. 350 is calling for a massive popular mobilization around the world in September. It is a mobilization to strengthen the hands of negotiators to win the breakthroughs that we need at the COP. But more than that, it will be a moment to reawaken hope, to reclaim agency, and to rebuild our collective power and courage to change the world. To change everything, we need everyone, and we hope that you will join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Aain. First of all, my apologies for calling you 360 rather than 350, but you did give a 360-degree view. And this was really remarkable. She ended on a very a note that is something which we are all looking forward to, involvement of the people in the decision-making process and impacting on the future COP decisions. And she emphasized the fact that it is important to arrive at the correct solutions which look at people's interest. They are at the core of the entire discourse that we are attempting. So thank you very much. With this, we have come to the end. Actually, we have already overshot our budget by 15 minutes, so there is practically no time for questions and answers. I would have loved to have them because you don't get ministers and such eminent speakers very often. But it's my duty to thank all of them for their extreme patience and their interventions and their speeches and their thoughts, which we have all been awaiting for, looking forward to with eagerness. While I thank them, I also thank you for your patience. And we will take any questions if you have. You are welcome to pass it on to the organizers. I will try and share it with them. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you the esteemed dignitaries for their insights, and special thanks to Rashmi, sir, for moderating this session smoothly. With that, I would request our panelists to come forward for a photo op, please. I would request our audience to remain seated for our next session.
At least we don't have to hold an award. Yes.
On behalf of TERI and WSDS Secretariat, we extend our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speakers for their valuable contributions. For our virtual audience, we encourage you to stay engaged via our YouTube live stream as we transition to the next session. For those in the auditorium, I kindly request you to remain seated as we prepare for our next session.